So, Christina, one thing that I don't see a lot of, especially with my Black and Brown clients, is accessibility or recommendations for AAC devices. Um, I also see that there isn't a push, especially with the school system, with students with autism having access to those AAC devices. And, oftentimes there are a lot of behaviors involved, and kids on the spectrum are given these eligibility categories of ED or EBD and autism. So just talk to us a little bit about that.
Yeah. Okay. So many things. So a lot of times, when we're looking at EBD or ED, emotional disturbance, which I've never been a fan of that phrase, but it is what it is. And autism, some states allow them to both be there, and then others, you have to really decide what is the core of what's going on. But so and I've kind of seen that too with my clients, is that a heavier amount of the Black and Brown population are ending up with a emotional disturbance diagnosis, and whether or not there's also an autism diagnosis, but pretty consistently there is some communication breakdown, whether there is a significant and they're non-speaking, or there is a pragmatics, which is that social speech, or something else happening, but at the end of the day, they're not able to fully communicate, wants, needs, thoughts. And, depending on the age, we all get frustrated with that. So that lack of communication and that frustration that builds then can very often lead to behaviors, because they are trying to communicate, right? They're using nonverbal communication to tell you, I'm frustrated, I'm angry, I don't like that. We're not listening to those nonverbal cues, because they are communicating. I guess let's go back to, they are communicating. It's a gestural communication, but maybe it's not an effective way for them to communicate. And they are lacking that option of another method of communication that is going to get them what they want, but not have a negative associated with it. And so this is why parents, having this information is so important, because, sometimes the school isn't even aware of it. But parents need to advocate for that speech and language and pragmatics evaluation. They need to advocate for an OT sensory evaluation, because if those kiddos are not regulated, then it makes a lot of this much more difficult. And they need to advocate for that AT and communication evaluation, because we need all of those tools and those measures to know how to help and support the kiddo. And if they can't communicate, we've taken away the enjoyment of people, life, everything. That is a basic, it's a basic need, and it's a basic right to be able to communicate and interact and advocate for ourselves. And so if we can't use it with words, whether it's typed or spoken, or using ASL, if you don't have a method to connect, then you're going to use another method at your disposal, which may not be one that we necessarily want them using.
And those are those negative behaviors that
Right.
educators and parents often see coming out in kids. They're not making the connection that it's a failure to be able to communicate with you effectively, and they're trying to communicate through this behavior. But people miss that sometimes.
They do, because we get caught up in our feelings. We get caught up in whatever drink they've knocked over to get your attention, whatever piece of paper they've torn up, whatever, art project they tossed to the floor. Look, they may have been trying to tell you, I'm frustrated. It didn't turn out the way I wanted. And I'm mad. I'm angry. This isn't how I wanted it to be. They don't have a way to tell you I'm frustrated or help me fix this part. Or, I hate, I don't know why you keep giving me grape juice. Grape juice is disgusting. And by the way, grape juice is disgusting. They don't have another way to tell you.
Right.
They don't have a way to tell you that it's too loud in the room, or they need that they're ready to go have a movement break because they're going to climb out of their skin if they don't get a chance to move and walk. So they're going to run off. They're going to throw something. And so often it boils down to that is the nonverbal communication that they have at their disposal, because we haven't valued the student enough to think that they were entitled to communication. So a lot of people don't know this, but by the time a kiddo is 18 months old, they've had 4,000 hours of oral speech immersion.
Wow.
And so while you and I may be hearing, if we were, my son is hearing, but he was not using oral speech. So he had all that immersion. But when he got his device, when he was 2.5, he had 0 hours with an AAC device. So what we'll look at is called a dual symbol immersion age. So yeah, he's 2.5, but he's 0 when it comes to AAC. And in that year, his dual symbol immersion is only 1 year. It's not 3.5, it's 1. So we really have to look at how long that students had that access. But I'll tell you this, before we got access to an AAC device, Nicholas was starting to bang his head against the table when he was mad at dinner time. And as soon as we got a device, that stopped, because he didn't have any other way to tell us that something was making him mad in that moment. And he was just frustrated. He was pissed.
Right. It's the equivalent to adults that yell, throw things, everything else,
Yep. Get up, walk away, stomp off.
That's right.
Adults do it, but we look at the behavior differently when it comes out of a child. And it's not fair, and it's not right, because those kiddos don't have the time and the depth of history and background to have those other tools, because we haven't given them or taught them those tools.
That's right.
So
and the adults have been taught the tools and still don't use them.
Correct. And then we're holding those kids to a different standard.
That's right.
So you did mention autism and AAC devices, and so that's another fun area for me. About 80%, roughly, I would say 80% of kids with autism are also Gestalt language processors, or GLPs. And that's an area that's not really talked about all that much. There are not.
So the Gestalt language processors, is that like, the kids that use echolalia, or they just repeat the words back to you? Or kind of tell us a little bit more about that.
Yeah, so there are 2 ways that we typically acquire language. There's an analytic processor, which is what most people are. I'm going to guess probably, you may have been as well, where we take and learn individual units of speech. So cup, milk, mom, and then we learn to put them all together into a sentence. Gestalt processors are the exact reverse. They don't see those individual words or those individual units of speech as having any definition. It is the entire sentence that has meaning for them. So, go get a drink could mean open the refrigerator, because they know that's where you go to get the drink. It could mean I want a drink of milk, I want a drink of water. I want to go play in the pool because I like to drink the pool water. Okay, any of those, that
Right.
whole unit of speech is what is meaningful for them, not the individual words. Those are also kiddos that people tend to call, you'll sometimes hear intonation babies, because those are the kids that love the rhythm of your speech. They usually love music. They're the ones that are often watching the video and then rewinding it, watching the video and then rewinding it. They're watching that same section over and over and over. It's because they are memorizing the language. That is how they are practicing. They're like, oh, well, that was exciting. And usually why watching some of our spicier language and our expletives, because usually when you say something like that, it's with a lot of emotion and feeling and importance, right? We don't just
Yes.
kind of sadly say, oh, it's usually, wow, oh, and then we say
Yes.
a word. So they will
Yes.
catch that because it sounds, there's a lot of emotion attached to it. There may be a memory attached to it, like something big happened when that phrase was said. So they're going to repeat it when a similar occurrence happens. My son is a Gestalt processor. So for an example, because of his disability, falling for him could be very medically urgent, right? So when he falls down in any way, he hears, "Oh, are you okay?"
Yeah.
So now anytime he falls, he will just say, "Oh, are you okay?"
Yeah.
Because to him, that is what is said when you fall
Right.
down. He hasn't switched to the pronouns of I'm okay, or he can just tell me and comment, go, whoops, I fell. That's not where he was. So with Gestalters, they will use a lot of echolalia.
Mhm.
There's immediate and there's delayed echolalia. So if they're going to just repeat you instantly, or they're going to memorize that phrase, you may not even know that they've memorized, and then they're going to use it later on. But it's from a movie, or it's from, ooh, they were listening to me the other night when I was yelling at my mom, or when my husband and I were debating, whose cooking was worse. They heard all of that, and they're going to use all of that speech. But with Gestalts, kind of the big thing with school is that we don't teach that way. We don't teach language that way in school. So they're not going to progress at the same rate that other children do unless we provide instruction in their modality, the way they learn. Some kids will just be slow talkers, and will kind of naturally move through the stages of gestalting. And there are multiple stages where they are doing a lot of echolalia and a lot of one-word gestalts. And then they start to grow that. They start to grow the length of their gestalts when they're using them. And then eventually they get to the point that they're self-generating original speech that is not from a movie or somebody else, and that's not echolalic. But there are other kids that have to have interventions in order to move through those stages, or else they will get stuck. And those are the kids that I often see getting put into life skills, or, being told, gee, they're just not going to. But a lot of times it's because we're not providing the instruction for that language in a way that is meaningful to them. So kind of the originator of that is Marge Blanc. She's got some amazing books on that subject. Dr. Deanna Olenek has a lot of information on that here in DFW. And Chatterbox, which is a DFW clinic, has a lot of resources as well for gestalting and for AAC. But that's where you have to do a lot of reading, and you have to do a lot of educating of your school, because about 80% of our autistic kiddos are Gestalt processors. So when we're not seeing movement in their speech, that's a very likely candidate for an area that we're not supporting.
Right.
And we need to work with the school to start changing how we do our speech and language interventions,
Mhm.
so they have access to that language, because it's going to take them several stages to get to the point of being able to break apart those gestalts and start mixing them. It's called flexibility of speech, because eventually we want them to move from I want a drink to, I'd like some milk, or get me water, please. But until they get to the point where they can break apart and mix and match, they just have that gestalt, that short gestalt that they're using. And people will often equate that to, well, they're just not going to use more language. And that's not always true.
Yeah, and you're so right about that. My son is now 23 years old. And he had no language for about 5 years, other than like, one or two word utterances. But his first set of language was the echolalia.
Mhm.
And he literally, Shrek was his movie, and he found every phrase out of Shrek. And that was the way he was communicating with us. And it was on point. It may have come from the movie, but it was on point in regards to what he was trying to communicate
Right.
with us. And we had such a hard time, in schools. And it wasn't until he was in high school and I was fighting with, the school about services and so forth. And I ran into a colleague of mine who was at the high school where I was, years before. And she was an amazing, amazing educator that had figured out how to use pictures, which
Mm.
kind of formulates everything into that one big thing, to help him improve with his language. So I mean, it's crazy, but educators in the school system doesn't make sure that educators are kept up to date on, the new research and things that are how things are evolving. And as a result, our kids are left behind. So you're right. Parents really do have to get in there and get in the trenches and figure things out, and be a part of groups that help them, talking to each other. Because if you're sitting in a silo all by yourself and you don't know where to start, your child is going to lose out. So definitely thank you for sharing that. Mhm.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Love to.